I call to order the special city council meeting for Tuesday, July 30th, 2024, at 5:30 p.m. At this time, I'd ask you to please put your phones on vibrate or silence them as to limit interruptions for the council and the speakers. At this time, let's move on to item number 1 on the agenda. That's the roll call.
Blessum.
Here.
Fuller.
Here.
Janser. Olson.
Here.
Pittner.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Samuelson.
Here. We have a full jury, a full council tonight. Number 2 on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, moving on to item number 3 on the agenda, that is the budget Q&A. Just a couple of items here, housekeeping items. This is a business meeting for the council to discuss and question the various departments that we have within the city. So it is more of a business meeting for the council. So there will be no public input taken at this time. We will have plenty of opportunity for public input on starting August 14th. We will have an online session. I believe, Harold, that's with you, online or?
The 14th will be Public Works, so our Public Works staff will be available for questions at noon. And then on that Thursday will be Public Safety, so it'll be the police chief and the fire chief. And then Friday is all general government. That'll be me and other department heads that any of the public wants to ask questions. They can log in over their lunch hour and participate in that. And then those will be recorded and provided on our website as well. So if people aren't able to join but may have the same questions, they can log in on that. And then we also have the public hearing at the September 16th meeting, I believe.
Yes, that'll be the first reading in the public hearing. So, and those the online sessions are up on your screen right now for those wishing to jot those down. Or those are also going to be, or if not already have been, posted on the city's website. So the format for this evening is for the council members. We were all issued a budget book, and what we will do is follow that process in the budget and just go through each department. If there are questions, you can call on me, and you will have the floor for the duration of your questions in each of those departments. At the end, we will have any final questions for Harold or any of the department heads. So, are there any questions about the process? Lisa?
Oh, sorry. I had a question about the budget, not the process.
Which?
For Ms. Junt, the HR.
Okay, so we're going to start off. We'll start off, Harold, and I don't know if Dave wants to come forward. We're going to start off with the city council and city manager budgets. So at this time, are there any questions from the council on the city council or the city manager budgets? Seeing none, we will move on to HR. So Lisa, if you would like to step forward, and then
All right, thank you, Mr.
Lisa.
Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Junt. So I think it would be helpful, I know for myself and maybe for all of us, to have a little bit better explanation of the differences in the proposed pay plans. I know we have a couple options. One is to give no increases at all, and one was to have the step raises and the market raises, and then was a hybrid. Can you differentiate a little bit more for all of us
Certainly.
between those? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor and Council, of course, the full raises are what they are. They would just be following the same process that we have in the past years. The proposal that the city manager and I both think is probably a fair proposal would be the hybrid proposal. And what that does is that essentially the biggest thing that we run into is we're doing salary surveys for the market. The hybrid proposal would assure that any changes in our grades or our salary ranges would go into effect for those groups that are being affected by that, while it would also maintain so that there is not any compression issues because those groups are moving equally. And then the few other individuals, which I believe there's only a handful, about 40 individuals, would still get a small nominal increase, which would be the step increase. So it would still guarantee that there would be some increases for those individuals as well. If you go with the other options, say just going with the market increase, it disenfranchises about 40 individuals who would not get anything at all. One group that I'm particularly concerned about, if you go that route, is that our dispatch group is not changing their grades. And so if there is just the market adjustment, that particular group would not get any increases, and we're having a difficulty in actually recruiting for those positions. If you go with just the step increases, then again, we're falling behind the market, which is the one thing we're trying to stay in line with, is having our salary grades at least comparable to other municipalities.
May I continue?
Continue.
So, and maybe I misunderstood this when city manager was explaining this at our last meeting. I understood that the employee would get the option, but really the option would be, the decision would be made for them in that hybrid.
Correct.
Correct.
We're giving them the benefit of the better increase on the hybrid.
Okay,
And for most of the individuals, it is the market adjustment.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions for HR? Mike?
So just to continue that path, if we choose the hybrid model, as you guys have laid it out, does that, part of what we're trying to do is chase the market rates here. That's, we have a consultant that identifies that for us, and we're trying to go down that. My assumption is if we don't go that route, we're going to lose ground faster than the full model. Is that right? Or actually, does that take care of the market side? I'm just trying to get it right in my head. Actually, that might be okay. Might keep
It would
us
take
closer.
the hybrid does take care of the market side of the equation. Because again, we are looking at the salary data for the actual range in the salaries when you're looking at the market. The step increases are more of a cost of living adjustment
Yeah.
that we have included in the actual annual pay plan.
Okay, and so those that wouldn't have the market adjustment that we're hitting with the hybrid plan, do we run some risk with them that they do lose ground to market over time?
No, because they weren't
That's the
they weren't getting a market increase to begin with. So
Perfect.
You good, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Rob?
Thank you. Lisa, we had a meeting earlier today, and I want to thank you and your department for sitting down with us because it helped greatly. One thing I wanted to talk about, and we talked about it in this meeting today, and I think this is important to bring up so people in the city realize, if we were to give the full raise increase that we're talking about this year, the City of Minot employees over the last 4 years, 22 through 25 now, would have received $7,144,507 in pay increases, correct?
you are
That-
correct.
And that doesn't include their benefits package. So I
That
think
that is correct.
I think what we estimated out was that's between a 35 and a 37% raise over 4 years for most of the employees in the City of Minot.
Yeah, I believe that is pretty close. Yes.
Do you
Correct.
believe that this is a sustainable way to give raises?
No, and I've identified that for the last 2 years that I don't believe that this plan is sustainable. And so moving ahead, when we hopefully do our salary survey next year, we're going to be looking at a structure survey as well.
Okay, and is any of this merit raised, or is it all just based on time with the city?
The City of Minot has never used a merit-based system.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mike?
Yeah, so now just to switch gears a little bit, because you do have an addition in the budget. So can you talk to us a little bit again about what that additional HR specialist would be focused on, the types of things that you'd like to see, and sort of how we can measure the success of that job?
Certainly. In the past, especially for the last several years for my department, we've been very reactive and basically, as one of my individuals said, it's been putting out fires. We're trying to be proactive in getting out to these different departments and get the training that they need, not only for training that is required, but because we need to look at succession planning, especially like for our managers. We want to make sure that they're getting the correct training so that we can move them and keep them and retain them. I don't have enough staff to get us out to all these different departments to try and do that. We would like to make sure that we are more in their face, for a lack of a better word, so that we can move that along for them as well. And also some of the day-to-day stuff that generally my position would not handle, we've had to do because we just haven't had the staff to have backups for certain things, such as payroll. I'm the payroll backup. Well, that also limits a lot of the big picture items that most departments or most directors should be doing that we just haven't been able to do.
Can I continue? So then another question. So in the budget this year right now, with what the city manager's laid out, we've got two what I would think of as main city organization additions. One is yours, and the other is the plan reviewer. And then we've got 12 biota plant members who will go on city compensation. They will be handled as city employees. What's the effect of that in a department like yours where you're providing internal service as we continue to add staff in all different areas? What does that do to you with the limited staff that you have today?
Well, again, it stretches us to the limit. We just don't have the capabilities of trying to help all these different individuals or, again, being proactive. I mean, we should be there to be a concierge and help them through a lot of things and give them the training they need, but if we're not able to get out to those different departments, we just can't do that, so.
Can I continue? So with that thought in mind, as we go to add, and like the biota plant's a great example. This is a big long-term project that's been on the books for 20 plus years and headed in this direction. Even though the actual wages are being covered by the federal government, it's part of a plan that comes through the state. There's impact still to the city, and the city still bears the brunt of some of that overhead costs that comes with that. It's not just your department. Yours is an easy one to think of because they need benefit services, they need payroll services, all the pieces that come with that. But every other city department that's related, that provides some support internally, IT is another one, provides internal support, is going to be impacted by that. So one of the things that I wanted to get across through this process is that the free golden money coming from the federal government doesn't always turn out to be that. And I think as a council and as a community, we need to acknowledge that lay aside the fact that that's theoretically our dollars anyway. It's our tax dollars in a different way that's paying for that. Whether it's inflation dollars or it's actual tax dollars, there is a cost to the city in terms of overhead and in terms of how we handle those positions, even though they're covered by a pass-through from the federal government.
Sure, and I can't say that I know how that whole process works with regard to the biota plant, or if they will be doing pass-through on any of the additional costs that are associated with general government, which we do to some of the other departments. I don't know. That would be more of a finance question, I'm afraid, so.
Sure.
If we can have
Harold?
Mr. Joyce come forward, maybe he can answer some of that question.
Mayor, Alderman Blessum. So I did follow up earlier today. So Jason Sorensen, who's been working that, as our utilities director, has been working, with the Bureau of Reclamation on the NAS biota project. So in the work plan and the budget that the Bureau submitted for the operations of the biota plant down in Max, each fiscal year there's a reimbursement amount for personnel costs and fringe and indirect costs. So this gets to your question on indirect. How do we pay for the rest that's supporting these folks? So support from other city departments would be covered under indirect costs. So we would be determining a methodology of how we can gather that information and present our case to get reimbursement for other costs.
Good. Thank you, Tom. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lisa, kind of back to you and your additional position. So if in this proposed position, what exactly is that person going to do? Or is that sort of dependent on who you can hire? Or, is it going to be a trainer? Is it going to be a
We are
handling
all-
payroll, or what is the person going to do?
We are all generalists per se in my department. This person would be associated with backup, of course, for payroll. There's a lot of data entry that is required for payroll. There also would be backup and associated with the new leave process, short-term disability leaves, tracking of FMLA, things that we haven't been able to do in the past. Some of the WSI requirements have increased. Also, it'll take a few things off, like I had said, take a few things off of my plate, because I do now have some additional requirements that are going to be happening for Title VI and for some of the other programs that are coming online with CDBG and the MPO, so.
Okay, thanks.
Mark. Any further? Lisa?
Thank you. Just one follow-up question related to Alderman Blessum's comments. So, you obviously agree that our employees have seen a healthy increase over the last number of years. Those increases are based on surveys, correct, that you have done? And as the increases have come, have we seen less turnover?
Our turnover has gone down substantially in the last 5-6 years. So yes, I would say yes, that has been the case. There are certain positions that we have difficulty in recruiting. I don't necessarily think that that's associated with the pay that we're providing. It's just there's certain positions there's a trend for some difficulty in recruiting for those positions. So
Thank you.
Rob?
Just in a little bit of response to what Lisa said. So we have a platinum program for benefits for our employees in the city, right? And we're one of the best paying entities probably in the whole county. Is that correct?
I would say on the majority of positions, yes, we do pay very well.
Okay. So, I mean, that makes sense why people are sticking around longer. I mean, it has. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And just as another follow-up, as a preview to the agenda, at the end, we will be asked to adopt the preliminary budget and pay plan. And what that means is, if there's no corrections to it, that the mill levy is set at that, and we can't go above that, but we can always go lower. So that'll be the only action plan at the end. Harold, do you want to add to that, please?
And I want to add to that. In addition, that's the information that we submit to the county that then gets distributed in accordance with state law to all residents within the community about what the budget is that you're looking at and what their impact would be on their property. So they still have time to participate before the council adopts the final budget. So it's imperative that we get that preliminary budget approved this evening because our timeline is very tight to get that information to the county and meet that deadline so those letters can go out to the public.
Moving on to now, we will come up with are there any questions for the city attorney's budget? Mike?
Steph, can you talk a little bit, there's a line item in there for attorneys, and my assumption is that's where we use outside counsel for very specific things. Is that a good assumption with that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Can I continue, Mr. Mayor? So with that in mind, how, over the long term, how do you expect that to change? Right now, we've got a lot of that going on. I know eminent domain cases are a portion of that, whether it's related to flood or other pieces that we have going on. What's, in your mind, what's the trend with that? Will we likely need more of that as time goes by, less? Does it kind of stay stable with where it's at?
It depends on Mayor and Alderman Blessum. It kind of depends on what issues are being faced with the city and how much risk we're willing to take in projects. Oftentimes, if we're taking on some risky endeavors, therein lies an inherent risk with also encountering lawsuits. In our specific office, we have 3 attorneys, and we're just not equipped to handle complex civil litigation or some of these complex specialized matters. Like we have a Dorsey and Whitney Legal Services contract in there for $20,000. That's for specialized expertise in economic development matters. So that's one, for instance, that if that's not something that we're going to be particularly pursuing, then we may not use that particular contract that much. We also have a contract in there for Onstead and Twitchell. That's for conflict matters, like you would have seen with our alcohol ordinances this past fall. We retain them in those matters. They're providing some specialized research for us right now on our licensing caps and things of that nature. So it just depends on what the council's appetite is for some of these projects, and it fluctuates. It's not a clear and fast determination. So some days if we encounter frequent lawsuits, that dollar number goes up, and we can come back for a budget amendment during the year to ask for that if we encounter something of that nature. But I think this is a fairly solid view of what we have coming up for 2025 at least.
So with that in mind, and that's kind of where I was going was, can you talk a little bit now about the attorneys that are on staff, including yourself? What are the types of things that you're handling within your team? Because that's where the key expertise is, and these are sort of line items based on the type of business coming before you, right?
Yes.
Is that right?
So we have a staff of 3 attorneys. It's myself, Corbin Dickerson, and Nick Schmitz. They're both assistant city attorneys. I provide the overall general counsel for the office. I provide services to the city council, all of the department heads, matters of those nature. And then our 2 assistant attorneys have specialized portfolios that they manage. And so one of them is municipal court and the police department and the fire department. So they provide most of the initial contacts to them, and they manage our criminal practice that goes through municipal court and the citations that are issued for B misdemeanor violations of city ordinance, traffic ordinances, and infractions of that particular nature. The other side is what we call kind of our community development portfolio that consists of helping review contracts for public works, working through different flood control issues with engineering. It's a lot of contract review. It's a lot of ping-ponging around different questions, different departments. It's very much a generalized practice. So we have a little bit of knowledge about a whole lot of stuff, and we have had the opportunity to specialize only in issues that have come before the council. So I don't know if that answers your
No,
question.
it does, absolutely, I appreciate it, yeah.
Done. Any other questions of the city attorney? Seeing none, thank you, Steph. Moving on to finance. Do we have any questions of finance? Mike?
So the place that I want to start in finance, and there might be a few things we want to talk about here, but the first one I want to start with is that in our annual comprehensive report at the end of 2023, we had a note from our auditors that let us know that we're over the statutory limits for our general fund reserves. And so I thought whether Harold, Dave, if you guys could talk about that a little bit. The thing that I'd really like to understand right now about it is with where we were, what's our plan to rectify that? Where do we expect to end 24? And where does the proposed budget leave us at the end of 25? Because my first thought is when do the checks roll off the check printer to hand them back to the people? That's where my first thought goes when we have an excess of funds. Now, I know that there's more to it than that, and so I'd like to hear some answers on that one.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, it's a combination of a few things. Part of that is our practice of building up those reserves intentionally for large purchases that we know are on the horizon. And we have to essentially put that money in the savings account to write that check at some point in the future. So that inflates those reserves in the meantime. Some of that could have been avoided had we transferred that money to a capital equipment fund or a capital projects fund, so it wouldn't show up in the general fund. So a little bit of it is housekeeping. And then there are some things looming on the horizon that are still unknown at this point that can greatly impact the amount of reserves that we have available, and particularly in the general fund. And part of that is the legacy city hall building, as we're referring to it, or the police department headquarters. We have a little bit of money that was set aside, I believe in the 23 or the 24 budget for that. That's not going to be enough to accomplish even a small remodel of that project or that building. So we don't have any of that built in. Presumably that funding for whatever the size of that project would be utilizing reserves as well. So there are some things on the horizon that we know about. Still haven't quite been nailed down exactly what the amount is that is definitely going to reduce that reserve amount.
So, all right, so as we start through the process then, so with the second part of the question I asked then, so we ended 23 with a little over $7 million in excess of what the statutory requirements are. I realize that there were things that housekeeping-wise we could have done to avoid that part. Where do we expect to end 2024? Will we get under the statutory requirement at the end of 2024?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, we will be under the statutory requirement at the end of 2024.
Okay, and then the 2025 budget, I would expect then also, because we kind of understand the game now, it will also have that one under the statutory requirement.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, that's correct. And part of that is going to be the natural progression of things as these large projects play out, and it comes time to actually do that project or buy that equipment. That's naturally going to draw down those reserves as well.
Okay, so just continuing with this thought process then. So Right now, in one of the graphs that the city manager had in his presentation, a week and a half ago, we saw a consistency around what we're spending versus budget, year after year after year. It's typically, I don't know the numbers, you guys might have them off the top of your head, but it's consistently coming in under budget, year after year. At least the last 5 that we showed there, significant dollar amounts. I think the number that I can see in the 25 line, and we'll maybe talk about this in a minute, about general fund reimbursement, which is, I assume, part of how that's occurring right now. So it's a long-winded way to get to my question. Right now, it feels a little bit like our practice is to over budget in terms of expense, to drive reserve revenue, to have it available for later. Now, in a business, if I do that, my son and I in our business, if we ran that way and we had, we budgeted an expense and it came in lower, that's a good thing. We have more profit. Governments are not in the business of profit. That's not how that works. So governments are in business to pull the funds from the public they need to do business. So when we run a profit, it means we overtaxed. That's a simplified way to put it. It's my small head way to look at it, okay? And so my question is, with that in mind, does that practice have to be that strong, if anything? Do we have to be putting away that level of dollars? Because I just want everybody to understand, when we don't spend the money that we collected from the public, we have overtaxed them. We don't give it back. It's gone. It's gone from their pocketbooks and it's sitting in city coffers. So I need to understand a little bit of what our approach is going to be going forward with that, and if we're going to continue that, because continuing to underspend, to me, isn't a benefit. That's overtaxing.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, things have morphed a little bit in the last few years. Typically, when I first came back to the city, generally where that fund balance was building, in particular the general fund, was exactly like you said, we're underspending the expenditure side of the equation, and that was what was driving the fund balance increase. And the last year now in particular, we spent the bulk of our budget. It wasn't 100%, but it was, I think, 98-point-some% to the general fund. Where we built fund balance last year was we came in higher than anticipated on the revenue side of the equation. So before we had the adequate revenues, or the revenues were pretty dialed in, we were spending less than we anticipated on the expenditure side. That's kind of flip-flopped now, where we're spending the budget on the expenditure side, or the bulk of it. We've been fortunate the last few years to have some additional revenues, primarily in interest revenues. And we continue to dial in those estimates, but we're forecasting here that interest revenues that are 14, 15, 16 months down the road. So there's not a great deal of certainty on where those revenues or how they're going to come in. They could drop off, they could increase. The next thing that goes with that is we can have a combination of things where we spend down reserves plus have a drop in interest rates, and now we have kind of two forces acting at the same time that really drives that down. So we do try to hone it in as close as we can. The law requires that we appropriate the funds before we can spend it, so we're a little bit of a double-edged sword, that we authorize positions. And I know in the last few years we've made the practice, in particular with the police department budget, that we've authorized positions. We know historically that we haven't been at full staff for a number of years, so we haven't budgeted all of those positions. So that was kind of in an attempt to do exactly like you're saying, to rein in how much we're passing along, because historically the last few years we haven't been able to spend it all. Even if the chief could hire them all tomorrow, I'm sure he would, but that just hasn't been how things have played out the last few years. So we've tried to do some of those things to minimize that impact. It's just with the window that we're required to forecast out into, it's just difficult to really hone those in really tight.
Yeah, and I certainly understand being on the safe side. I mean, I understand why that approach would tend to make sense, both whether it's revenue and the expense side. So switching gears on a little bit, same topic, but can you explain what, when we see throughout the budget, general fund reimbursement, what that is?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, the general fund reimbursement comes from enterprise funds, and the enterprise funds operate like a business. So water, sewer, sanitation, landfill, airport. So what they are doing is they're taking a portion of those business-like revenues or income and passing it through to the general fund to offset the cost of general government. City manager's office, city attorney's office, HR, finance, all of these other departments that are typically funded by property tax revenues. It's kind of a way of looking at the enterprises paying their fair share out of the fees that they collect for services that they provide for the citizens.
Right, I can hold for a minute.
Rob, hang on, we'll go.
Wanted to follow up on Alderman Blessum's question on the general fund transfers. I think by state law, we're capped that we can only transfer 20% over. I think right now in the 2025 budget, I think we're only bringing over like 8% or something like that. So there's another 12% there that we could transfer out of the enterprise funds to support general fund operations. But there again, you're doing a catch-22. The more I transfer over, I still have an operational costs for all those services we provide, which applies pressure to raise the rates in those areas. So we're trying to do a balance of making sure these services are paying their fair share of the general administration costs, but not apply significant pressure to try and push the need to raise water, sewer, trash rates, those kinds of things. So I just wanted to put that out there for information as well.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I
ahead.
can quickly
Yep, go ahead.
add on to that too. We have a few enterprise funds in the city that also are supported by tax levy. So if we increase the transfer from those enterprise funds to the general fund, it just means that we have to transfer more tax levy to them to fill that gap. So it's kind of a vicious cycle if we do that across the board.
If I can continue, Mr. Mayor. Actually, my concern was the opposite. My concern was that that was the way that we were feeding the general fund reserves, was that we would provide a budget in the other departments that was actually higher than, not necessarily than what we'd expect, but because of our conservative way of budgeting, that it just created money all the time, flowing back the other direction, which is the taxpayers paying for it. They're being levied based on that dollar amount, but it's just feeding the reserves. And so I'm certainly not suggesting that we do more transfers. If anything, I had it in mind that we need to do almost none, but I understand now better why that's occurring.
Rob,
Thank you. Dave, again, thank you and your team for taking time to talk with us today. That was very helpful. The one question I asked you in that meeting, and I'm going to ask you again here. So we're asking for a $28 million increase in the budget this year to run Minot versus last year. We know some of that is NAS and flood control. How much of that $28 million is federal and state fund pass-through, and how much is on the citizens of Minot? Do we have an idea?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Fuller, with the city manager's proposed budget, the increase for property taxes is at zero. I think it actually came out just a few dollars less. So in that respect, I would say that none of that increase is from property taxes. Now, some of that spending is for capital projects that may be supported by other forms of taxes, sales tax, for example, those types of things. So there is some of that, but the bulk of that increase is from federally and state-funded projects that we have, flood control and NAS being the prime examples.
Okay. That's all I had.
did you, Mike?
Yeah, so maybe a couple others. One, and this isn't right in your line items, Dave, but back to overall, one of the things that I was seeing is that our general fund interest revenues are expected to be down pretty significantly. Is that right now a hedge against interest rates coming down a little bit? Or is that just we've got less in reserve?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, that is a little bit of a change in practice and how we allocate those funds out. In the past, we have had all those funds into the general fund and it transferred it to the other funds, and now it's just a direct allocation into those funds.
So should we? My assumption then is that the dollars are the same across the board. It's in a different account. So are those interest revenues showing up somewhere else? Or are they not interest bearing in the places that they are? Or am I missing part of that?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, I would have to go and take a look just to make sure that I'm not missing something here, but I think we had anticipated that the interest revenues would be stable to up slightly. I think it's just a matter of how they show up in the budget on the revenue side. Some of that may have been a little bit masked, and particularly in some of the enterprise funds in prior budgets.
Okay. And so back to the beginning of what I was talking about. One of the things that we saw in some of the slides that city manager had, when you look at the general fund, you know, I think we have an ordinance that tells us we need to be at least 2 months of reserve in the general fund, right? That's where that's at. That one's not in state law. The upper bound is in state law, and that's it's a percentage, if I remember right. I can't remember what it actually is, but regardless, we're running more like even at the top end of the scale, we're running more like, I would say, 8 to 9 months in reserve. And I understand the save up thought process. If we, you know, City Hall, I think I understand why everybody thinks that that's the right approach. One of the things I get concerned about is that has not come before us, and we have no plan. We have no idea even where we're going. We've had a preliminary idea that I've seen pictures of it. I've seen the things that have come through. But with that in mind, with where we've headed and the amount of money that we're collecting from the public, it's as if we've got that in place and we're headed that direction, if that's part of those reserves. If we believe we've got 4 million of the roughly 34 million that's sitting in the general fund right now set aside for that's not based on an approved project at this point. And so I get concerned that when we're sitting with those kind of general fund reserves and other reserve types for that matter, that the people are paying for something they're not receiving yet. And that concerns me, because right now a lot of the feedback that I am getting directly from people is that they're tapped. That's the word that they use over and over. We're tapped. That's why I appreciate what Harold and his team have done to hold the line and do what they promised to do in his State of the City address and in the things that he's done. That's a great starting point for us. And now we have to figure out how do we make sure that we can go from there and add on to that. And so I don't know if that's as much of a question, Dave, as it is a statement that I'm making more. But I want everybody to understand kind of where I'm coming from on this, because this is a lot of why I wanted to get involved, was to try to help this, what I believe is this approach that we're taking right now.
Harold, to kind of talk about that reserve question, as I understand, Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. In accordance with the policies that the City Council has approved and directed staff to do with regards to the general fund reserve, state law requires us to have a 1/12 in reserve, but City Council has enacted a 3/12 policy, which is that 3 of 12 months that you talked about. In addition to that, the City Council, or previous City Council, also enacted that within that general fund reserve, we need to have an additional 30% operating revenue. So now, I do agree with the policy with regards to the 3/12. I would advise any community, best practices, you need anywhere from a 3 to 6 month reserve for operations. If something happens like a flood or a tornado and you have no revenues coming in, you have money in the bank to pay costs of staff and operations and everything else until that revenue starts trickling back in. But I would say that, in my personal opinion, the additional 30% operating reserve is a bit excessive.
Can I continue, Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
And so with that right now, just trying to understand your graph, Harold, that you had in there, I think we're well above that. We're well above the 30% even. Is that correct? I mean, there's another block that's maybe that big again on the right side, which is, I think in your graph, it was like unassigned or whatever the word was.
The available funds.
Yeah.
Yeah, is there.
So-
Now, with the 3/12 and then the 30%, 30% of 12 months is another 4 months. So you have 7 months in reserve. Again, I typically advise anywhere from 3 to 6. So, that's a very conservative approach. But North Dakota traditionally has been extremely conservative. We pay a lot of cash. I mean, we have a lot of projects that we've completed. Fire station number 5, the retaining wall around the police department, those kinds of things. I would say probably 90% of communities across the country wouldn't be able to pay cash outright for all those. Those would be bonded projects. You'd be paying principal and interest on those projects. So there is a value to the conservatism of North Dakota and Minot. for putting this money aside and paying cash. Ultimately, you're saving the taxpayers the interest payments over 20, 30 years for that. But I also understand what you're saying with the pressures that applies, and that's the risk of the conservatism that we're taking is we put large amounts of money in a bank waiting for those for future projects, and that adds up. And when the economy is strained, that's harder to justify.
If I can continue on that then. So what I also believe that does, when we have that level of reserve, whether it's in our general fund or it's in water and sewer reserves or whatever that is, it makes, to be honest, it makes our decision-making much too easy. You know, we have an issue with Project B. We have Broadway Circle. The project just has a major problem, $1.4 million. Well, we've got it. I mean, I think the comment from council on the night that was done was, we've got the money, that's why we have reserves. Those kinds of decisions should not be that easy. I'm not saying it was the wrong decision whatsoever. I likely would have had the exact same vote at that moment in time. The same thing with buying land next to Public Works. $920,000 should not be such a drop in the bucket that it's just like, well, that's fine, that's easy. 25 years, we might need it, let's buy it. Should not be that easy. If that reserve was sitting, and that's the water and sewer, I realize, but if instead of a $34 million reserve, we're sitting at 12, now we're going, what are we risking if we buy this? My opinion, that's where government should be closer to. And so, you know, over time, I think we may need as a council to take a look at what our reserve policies are and to give direction to city staff in what that reserve should look like, because I'm not comfortable with the direction that we've gone now. We're taking reserves from the people and what they should be building in reserve in their checking accounts and in their savings accounts, and we're theoretically trying to save them money down the road. And I understand that, but at the same time, I don't think that can be our role. I think what our role has to be to run things so that we're breaking even with what we need to grab from the people when we need it, and that we're not being as forward looking as we are, because it might force us to tighten our belts, and that might be a good thing.
Rob?
Just one more or two more quick things, Dave. We talked about this earlier, the 75% increase in property and content insurance and the 77% in banking and credit card fees. We are exploring options or RFPs on both of those, correct?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Fuller, yes, we are. We have RFPs that will be out on the street this fall for both banking services. We are looking at implementing a new credit card processor. Some of that's mandated from the software companies and the folks that they are compatible with. So we're a little bit captive in that instance. I did take a look at the insurance issue we discussed earlier and the increase. And one of the issues there is in the budget book, you're looking at 2024 budgeted amount and 2025 budgeted amount. We saw a significant rise in property values in 2024 after we had created the budget, and a significant increase in premiums. So the combination between the premium increase and the rise in values, you know, we had a new fire station come on board, we had some other buildings that came on board, plus just the cost of construction. So our actuals for 2024 were considerably higher than what we had budgeted. So when you create the new budget based on the actual number and not what was budgeted last year, it's that compounding effect again. And they're anticipating a significant premium increase again this year. So we've looked at some items to combat that. We've increased deductibles. The insurance companies have actually dropped coverage on a few items like light poles, bridges, some things like that. Thankfully, bridges typically are pretty sturdy. You know, it's hard to completely destroy them. I'm not going to say impossible, but generally they're pretty stout. Light poles, unfortunately, not so much. And we have a number of claims with those, and they just get to be very expensive. So claims history comes into play there as well. So that's why with adjusting some of the deductible amounts, of course, we're assuming some risk associated with that as well.
Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Dave.
I do have a
Oh,
question.
Lisa, I didn't
Thank
see your hand.
So
Sorry.
this is more of a generalized question. It's not necessarily your department, but in several of the departments, there is a line item for wearing apparel. can you describe that a little bit more? Is it uniforms? Is it PPE? Is it everything? Can you just give us a little more information on that?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman, or Alderwoman Olson, that is a combination. In some departments, it is high-vis vests, gloves, safety toe boots. It can be police and fire uniforms. So it is a little bit of a combination. There is some inclusion in there for clothing allowance for some positions that, for example, detectives at the police department get a clothing allowance in lieu of providing uniforms.
Okay, thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, one more quick one, Dave. Back, and this is a big general one, so that's why I wanted to ask you, because I don't think we'll hit it later. One other thing that I noticed in the main comparison by the spending categories is that electricity is down almost $1 million, about 22%. Is there an explanation, or is there something changing where things are ending up?
Mayor Ross, Alderman Blessam, that again is a combination of refining estimates. So in the last several years, we've had a number of components of flood control come online, Broadway Pump Station as an example, where we didn't have any idea what it would cost us to operate that. And those pumps in there are massive. And, you know, the demand charge that we get when those kick in is substantial. Well, it's been fortunate we haven't had a lot of significant activity where we haven't had to go into flood operations. So, you know, historically now we have some more data to go by.
Yeah.
Some of that is also the NAS biota plant. When that first came on and for the 2024 budget, the thing was still being built. It was a guess. We used the best data that we could think of. So we've been able to refine that a little bit when we start getting closer to completion and how it's actually going to operate. And that also impacted some of the water treatment chemicals, was another line item that was impacted by that as well.
Yeah. And, you know, in the actual world, that's a good thing, right? I mean, we're ending up spending less than we expected. The hard part, and this is something I'm going to have to deal with sitting up here, is when you think of that from a government perspective, because it was budgeted, we collected the funds to be ready for that. And that's hard for me. And so I got to kind of work through that. I'm just letting everybody know that, because that's a really hard thing for me, for us to collect funds from the public and not use them. Now, I'm not saying overspend because of that. I'm saying you're doing exactly the right things that we're learning. And if we get it right the next time around when we have more data.
Thank you, Dave. Moving on to the IT. Any questions of IT? Seeing none. Assessor. Any questions of the assessor's budget? Seeing none, we'll move on to the PD. Do we have questions of the PD? Chief? This time I'll turn it over to Mike. Mike, floor is yours.
So I think again, thanks to Harold and the team today, we got.
And just,
oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I also want to include, we'll do PD, task force, and dispatch. Since we have chief up here, we'll use him for all three. So my apologies, Mike, the floor is yours.
That sounds good. No, and again, thanks to Harold and the team for answering a few of our questions today. So I think I got most worked out in my head of where the PD is moving. And again, thanks in my particular case for being responsive to something that I cared a lot about, which was this idea that we all acknowledge that we are not likely to hire exactly what we would all love to. And so we've got to work our way towards that. And the way that I've come to understand is that the dollars reflect that, but the authorizations are still there. So if you have a great hiring year, and we may need a budget amendment, but we're able to move forward with you with that. And so I think that that's a good position for us to be in. So I appreciate that. With that, I did have one remaining question. If I remember the numbers right, is there an additional sergeant that pops out in this budget, or is that an anomaly in the data that we saw? Do you remember?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessam, I think what had happened was that was actually authorized a couple years ago, but it for whatever reason it was authorized and it was budgeted, but I don't know exactly what happened.
Sure.
That
and again, earlier today we had some of that stuff come up because there were the FTE counts weren't matching what I was expecting, and I suspect it's the same idea, so that makes sense.
It was a current position that we just changed to a sergeant position, so it was an officer. We changed it to sergeant, but for some reason, it didn't get reflected, and I think it was like 2 years that it was missed.
Okay.
So we had money budgeted, but just not in the right category.
Gotcha, okay. And then, just to continue then, the drug task force, that looks like a big change to me. So is there something fundamental that's changing in how that's being handled? Is that a state-run program that we were participating in? So can you talk about that a little bit?
So, yeah, Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, that we actually don't have a budgeted, we kind of have a budget estimate. They apply for a grant. Those grant funds don't come back. They don't get the approval on those grant funds until later in the year. So it's everything that's in the budget is ultimately grant funded, but it has to be budgeted and show up there. So we kind of use the estimate, and then the budget comes back through the grant.
Okay, I have to.
Kind of confusing, maybe finance can explain it in a better way, but that's my brain working.
So, just if I continue, so with that, and Dave, maybe you can, because it looks like it gets zeroed out. It's got $145,000 and it looks like it zeroes out, but does it actually come back once you have that info?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, that's exactly what we would anticipate when that grant is approved. When the city accepts the grant, we would do the budget amendment to budget it. It's again kind of a housekeeping thing. There's rules against supplanting for grants on things that you already anticipated to spend. So that's why we removed it from the budget, so we don't run into any issues with that.
Okay, so that raises a different question for me then. If for whatever reason something gets disrupted in that flow, does that mean we don't actually run the task force? Is that what, or we don't participate in it?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessing, that would be something we would have to address at that time. We would either have to find another funding mechanism in lieu of the grant proceeds, or not have a task force, or some other alternative combination.
So with that in mind, does it make more sense to have it in the 25 budget, assuming that, and this is the part I don't know about what you guys are doing, Dave, so help me understand. Is it better for it to be there? Because I don't think we're gonna say we're not gonna do that work. I mean, if there may not be more important policing work that we're doing right now. So is this the safer way to do it or the better way?
Mayor Ross, Alderman Blessum, I think this would be the preferred method. The assumption is that the task force will continue.
Right.
It puts us on a little better footing with the grant process.
Yeah.
But the anticipation would be that it would be funded by the grant or some other funding source.
Mr. Mayor, well,
Lisa.
Dave is here.
Dave.
That's so it's a question for both the chief and Dave. So we're, looking at this, we would authorize all of the police department positions. Historically, those positions have not been filled, but, in best case scenario, there's a lot of officers who want to work at the Minot PD. Where are we going to draw the funds from?
Mayor Ross, Alderwoman Olson, there would be an example of the most likely source would be general fund cash reserves.
And what is that amount, if we were able to fill all of those positions?
I think it was 500.
That was going to be my off-the-cuff guess, would be about 500,000.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Harold.
And to follow up on Alderwoman Olson's question, so in the year 2025, theoretically, if we filled all positions, we would dip into reserves for that $500,000. But then in the 2026 budget, we'd either have to find revenues or expenditure cuts to permanently build that expense into our budgets going forward, because it would not be my recommendation that we continue to reserves to pay $500,000 of operational costs of the police department. You'd have to identify a permanent revenue source or cut permanent expenses to make room for that in future budgets.
Thank you.
Any other question? Oh, go ahead, Scott.
So if I remember correctly in past budgets when we talked about if the funds weren't used for those police officers, it went into an account? Or basically a cash reserve, so we might have 3 years that we have cash reserves for police officers?
Mayor Ross, Alderman Samuelson, those unspent general funds would go to general fund cash balance. So that is our general fund cash reserves that we're talking about. So that money, with the general fund, it's exactly the way the name sounds. It's general government fund. So that money would stay in that fund unless it's transferred out for some other purpose.
So that's part of where the reserves have come from.
Mr. Mayor Ross and Alderman Samuelson, that's correct. That is a portion of it.
I've got Alderman Pittner is on the line and has a question. Paul?
Thank you, Mayor. Just for the chief, above and beyond the 14 vacant positions, what do you know as far as retirements or transfers? Is there anything on the horizon that you know within your department of upcoming openings or vacancies?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Alderman Pittner, we now have 15 openings. I think we're going to have 4 offers that we'll make. And that's the complicated part is it's kind of the ever-changing world of employees right now for the PD. Nothing as far as retirements. I'm not aware of any in 2025. 2026 is a pretty heavy year for a number of people who will be eligible for retirement.
Okay, thank you.
Mike?
So maybe just one comment more than anything. One of the, to your point, Harold, if we were in the fortunate situation where we're able to hire the staff that we'd like to and to put on the streets, a big part of the general fund reserves that we sit on today came from this concept. So if we've built up $3.5 million by sort of overfunding police staffing for the last few years, I can't imagine a more perfect way to spend it. So if that allowed us to draw that down, that would make perfect sense to me. That's not a long-term plan. We would work our way back towards that, but I'd love to see that actually.
Any further question for PD, dispatch, or narcotics task force? Thanks, John. Oh, Scott.
I don't know who would be answering this, but where are we at on the police department as far as the facility? As far as what the plans are, what we're gonna do with that?
Go ahead, Harold.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Samuelson, in essence, staff kind of paused that conversation until a few pieces fell into place. One being the election results of the new council, and 2 would be arguably the results of whatever the ballot measure is with regards to property tax. All those are major factors. I think the intent of staff and in some conversation with the mayor, the plan was to get the new council seated, let's get through budget, and then one of the priority conversations that we would have with the community and the council would be that issue and discussing what alternative are we moving forward with, how are we going to pay for that, and those kinds of things. So I would anticipate a conversation about that here this fall, probably starting September, October, after you've kind of finished your work with the budget. We can expedite that conversation if the council chooses to, but staff has been pretty inundated and we still have some work to do depending on what the council chooses to do with budget changes on finalizing all that and preparing the documents and getting it ready to submit to state and those kinds of things. But overall, that's kind of the initial plan was to get through budget, and then that was one of the first priorities to discuss with the council and the public going forward.
Go ahead, Scott.
If I could, then I'd like to say that I feel that that's a priority to look at. I'm not in favor of building a new building. I'm not in favor maybe of going as extensive as what the consultant maybe came up with for the other facility. but I do know something needs to be done. The city had an open house there, and I got to tour it with my wife and my son. And I could not believe that the city of Minot has left a facility like that for the police department when we're sitting in this building. One of the comments that I believe my wife made to me is she couldn't believe that we didn't have a police department before we had this building. And I agreed with her, because really there's nothing wrong with that building that's over there. I understand that, you know, we needed to expand and things like that, but I think for what we expect our police to do and the facility that they have, I think it's a priority, and I think it's sad that we've left them with that.
Lisa?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I know we're probably getting a little bit off of our question and answer time, but I think it does deserve a response. I completely agree that we need to make this a priority. The reason that City Hall was moved was because it was part of the NDR grant, and the police department sadly was not. Dispatch was, but the police department wasn't. So the funding was available for this. It was not available for the police department, but I agree. It's a priority, and I hope that we can take action on it soon.
Okay, moving on. Thank you, Chief. Moving on to municipal judge, municipal court. Any questions there? Seeing none, we will move on to fire department. Do we have questions of the fire department?
I do.
Rob?
Hey, Chief, thanks for coming in. I only have one question. I see one line item here, 41,300, that has an 83% almost increase in overtime. What's that attributed to?
So we did an analysis. We changed our payroll system and the way we're paying our firefighters. They're paid, it's a very complex, they're paid on a 29/12 schedule, like a normal 40-hour employee like myself is a 20/80 in the year. Anything after 53 within a certain period of time, they can only be worked 53 hours a week. So what they do is they give them premium hours or overtime. So they are now paying them a little differently. They're paying them on 106 hours every 2 weeks. And so there's an automatic overtime of 14 hours for 2 shifts. And anything above that is automatically overtime. So I can go into it deeper with you maybe next week.
Yeah.
I can show it to you, but it's a very complex system. And we had an analysis done by an outside counsel on making sure that we are covering FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, appropriately, and we are. So we are finally kind of correcting how we were paying our firefighters, which caused an increase of overtime.
Will that be a standard thing going forward then?
It will, and hiring more firefighters doesn't necessarily fix that. It's just kind of the cost of having firefighters and paying them according to the law.
Okay, thank you.
Mike?
One thing, just to continue on that, is there, just for my knowledge, is there something specific to the firefighter role or job in the law that requires us to pay them, first of all, as a non-exempt employee? Again, I'm not suggesting that we make them salaried and just say, look, you got to work every hour there ever was, but is there something specific structurally to how firefighters need to be paid? And I see Lisa maybe can.
Yes, firefighters, the majority of them, especially the control staff, is a manual process or a manual job, and they are not allowed to be paid as an exemption. So we are required to follow the law with regard to overtime for them.
Seeing nothing further, thank you, Chief. Moving on to community development. Do we have questions for community development? Seeing none, we will move on to inspection. Any questions for inspection?
So yeah, can we, one of the things that I want to be clear about, because it is one of our additions, can we get an explanation on the commercial plan reviewer? Have somebody talk us through that?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The commercial plan reviewer is a position that was in the inspections department during the oil boom era. It was cut out of the 2018 budget, I believe, before I was here. We have experienced a significant increase in permitting in our department over the last couple of years, a lot of remodel permits along with new construction. And right now our supervisors are currently doing that work. And they're not putting enough time in doing the jobs they're really supposed to be doing, and they're just overwhelmed with that work right now. They did 525 plan reviews last year alone. That could be anywhere from a deck that could take 10 to 15 minutes to review to the new high school, which could take several business days to review. So we're requesting the new commercial plan reviewer position to help speed up the process. For these reviews, right now, the wait time is 5 to 6 weeks for a permit. By hiring this position, we can probably cut that down to 2 weeks and get these permits issued a lot quicker. And then I'm not proposing a property tax increase to pay for this position. I'm proposing fee increases that our customers will pay in order to fund this position. So,
Mike.
And so with that in mind, because that was my recollection that's your approach, what has the feedback been on that? Has the trade-off between having to pay the fee for someone asking for it versus getting it done faster, is that a trade that they're happy with?
Mayor Ross and Alderman Blessum, yes, time is money to all of our builders and contractors and to our customers as well. The longer that they wait, the more interest that they pay to the bank on their projects, and it would be a savings for them in the long term to get their projects approved quicker. And then also another thing you have to remember, we are in a very cold weather climate here. We have a very short construction season as well. So I think the quicker we can respond, the more flexibility we give to our customers, and then get their projects done quicker and hopefully within the construction season.
Harold, just one for you, is something like Brian just talked about with that kind of lead time stuff. Are there dashboards that your team sees? Are there kind of key indicators like that you guys use? Because this is one I would love. If we go forward with this and we make the commitment to do that, we're putting it on the people calling for the plan to pay for it. I would love to be able to show them back, yeah, we got it down to 11 days. You know, that I think we'd all love that. So, but I think we'd have to kind of understand it. I'd love for it to be more than anecdotal, that it was, hey, here's what the dashboard is saying.
As far as key indicators, I think Brian and his staff do a good job of monitoring those numbers and those timeframes. We can encourage him to include that in his monthly report to the council. It's part of the city manager memo. If you want to see those on a regular basis, you can do it. But as he stated, he already has that data on top of his head. He's using that as justification for asking for the position. So they're monitoring and following that on a regular basis. We do talk about it in our one-on-ones on what those friction points are and what's causing that. Can we decrease the wait time by efficiencies with our current staff, or is it time to ask for an additional staff member to help do that? I will also state here that one of the options that was proposed earlier was to have people pay a fee to expedite a review. My concern with that is that wasn't very equitable, and eventually everyone's paying for expedition, but we don't. And once everyone's paying for it, you're not really expediting anything. So I felt that this alternative was a better way forward. So.
Yeah, and certainly for me, the flip side of that is also true. I mean, if we make the commitment, we do it, we start charging the fees, but it comes down and then goes back up, we're also all in the same boat, because now you've got people that have requested that plan review that are paying for it, and now they're not getting the service they were hoping. So I think it's really important that we deliver on that if we're gonna make the commitment.
I agree.
Scott.
So there were just a couple items, Brian, that I noticed just the percentage was pretty big that stood out, and one of them was the banking and credit card fees.
Okay.
It's not a huge amount, but it's like up 350%. Is that because of your online permitting?
I'm not sure the finance department fills in that category for us. So Dave or maybe Jenna can answer that one for me.
Mr. Ross, Alderman Samuelson. This is again a combination similar to the other credit card fees, new processor and anticipated increased activity. And part of that is driven by the online permitting process now, instead of people paying at the counter.
Okay. And then there was one item on there for capital improvements, $30,000.
Yes, Mayor Ross, Alderman Samuelson, that is for a new vehicle for the department. A lot of the vehicles we have are hand-me-down vehicles from other departments, and it's time for, and our fleet is very old and aging, and we're spending a lot of money on keeping those vehicles on the road, and it's time for us to buy a new vehicle.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Moving on to traffic. Any questions on the traffic? Seeing none. Engineering. Do we have questions on engineering?
So, Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
So one of the things I saw the commitment come through now to move from 8 million to 11 million for streets, which, satisfaction survey, that's a lot of the feedback. So Lance, the question I had for you is how does that feel as we look at 25? Is there the capability to do that much work, and how does all that lay out as we go forward?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Blessum, the going to from 8 to 11 will probably push our staff right to about the limit of what we can do in-house. Not only do we do our street maintenance projects in-house with our in-house staff, we also do our safe routes to school projects. We design those in-house. We also do just a handful of other in-house engineering projects in-house. We'll get into some of that on Thursday when we have our discussion. So that keeps our staff pretty busy. So anything above that, we're going to have to start leaning on some consultants to help us through some of that heavy lifting. Otherwise, there's just not enough hours in the day to adequately service those projects. We're not going to have enough people out there to provide the level of inspection that we feel we need to make sure that we don't have contractors. We want to make sure that quantities are being accurately reflected and paid for, and that we're getting our money's worth. So for us, that's important. We don't want to be getting behind where we're making mistakes, because that puts us at risk for claims and change orders out in the field when we're building stuff. So to us, that's probably the level at about 11 million where we're going to be able to handle it. After that, it's either a decision that we're going to have to make with trying to find additional staff resources, which has been a challenge for us, not only for us as the city, but when I talk to our partners in the consulting world up in this area, they're having challenges too. So that's something we're going to have to discuss when we go beyond that level.
And one other thing, I think I caught all this right. So right now, if the way I understand the budget, this roughly 17.5 million for Puppy Dog Cooley is moving forward to 25. Is that correct? And then there's roughly another 9 on top of that in that same category. And again, I apologize. I tried to load a lot of this in my head, and I don't have it all perfectly. But am I correct on that? Is that what that's looking at like right now? Because if I remember right, and I can't remember what budget it's even in, but there's 25 that I thought I remembered for that type of project, maybe in water and sewer or something.
It's probably in the storm sewer budget. Sure. Is generally where the Puppy Dog Cooley's been placed. Yes.
And so is that correct? It would move forward to 25 at this point?
At this point, that project is likely going to have to slide to 25. We're having some trouble picking up some of the easements we need for the project. And at this point, I feel it's too much of a risk to put that out for bids when we don't have the necessary easements we need. I don't want to bid a project and then have a contractor standing by and we don't have a place to put them.
And so just back to just one quick thing back on the 8 to 11 million, what will that feel like to them? Because that's almost a 40% increase in the amount of work that we're doing. What does that feel like during the summer? Would it be noticeable to have that much additional work going on?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Blessum, it kind of depends on the type of work we're going to do. And so If we did $3 million more in chip seal, the public's definitely going to feel that because that type of work covers so much more area. Really the goal with trying to get more of an increase in the amount of street funding we're doing, we want to get into some of these neighborhoods and actually reconstruct these streets. As an example, and it just kind of came up in your neighborhood, we were doing chip sealing, and the block over on, I think it was 13th and a half, we were going to chip seal that street, and we got out there ready to go. Our staff did a final inspection before they're going to chip it, and it degraded too much over the wintertime. We pulled it. We didn't want to throw good money after bad. And so we're going to have to basically just kind of keep that in maintenance mode, and eventually it's going to either have to be reconstructed or we're going to have to change it into a mill and overlay. So we're constantly looking at the right pavement management technique to put on those streets so that we're getting the best bang for our buck. The point of that is if we get into more of those reconstruction type of projects, they cost more, so you might not see more construction just because we're going to be spending more money on smaller neighborhoods, if that makes sense.
Right. Yep.
Lisa?
Yeah, thank you. So just to kind of segue off of that, if the increase is approved and you have to go in and do some reconstruction, does that mean that you won't need to special assess areas like that, or would there still be a special assessment that would be in those neighborhoods?
Mr. Mayor and Alderwoman Olson, at this time, council hasn't given us any direction to start doing special assessments. So our plan is to do status quo. We're going to go into neighborhoods and kind of design over summer, fall, put projects together over the winter time, bid them in the spring, and then construct them over the summer using that same methodology. If we'd have to start doing special assessments, you almost have to start a year ahead of time to get that process nailed down because there's so many steps you have to go through to hit that. So if that's an avenue that the council wants to explore, then we're gonna have to have a conversation about that and kind of change the way we do things.
Okay, thank you.
Mark?
Thank you. Lance, so in doing, say, a reconstruction, then I know that you typically try to coordinate with, say, any underground work that has to be done at the same time. So would that practice still continue to try to coordinate between, say, water main, sewer, whatever is down there, if you're going to go in and rebuild the road?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Janser, that's exactly what we want to do. Right now the strategy has been to stay out of some of those neighborhoods where we have big utility problems, just because we don't have the budget right now to go in and do wholesale reconstructions. And most of the really bad streets are on your local neighborhood streets. They have the cast iron water main, clay tile sewer, and storm sewer. So a lot of our focus right now has been on mill and overlays on arterial roadways, chip seals on neighborhood streets where we have good pavement still, trying to keep up the good infrastructure that we have, and patch the streets that are in decent shape, just kind of keeping them by until we have the budget where we can get in and do wholesale reconstructions. We'd partner then with Public Works, and then we'd go in and we'd replace everything. At that point, we'd probably have to start looking at some consultant help, just because of the manpower it takes to get in and do that type of work. It just takes a lot of bodies to get in and survey and design and produce plans for that large of a scale of project.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, may I continue?
Yep.
And then the other thing is, I know that, and based on the focus on streets and roads in the citizen survey, I know that you also are looking at not only the condition of the pavement, but also the sort of the drivability of the street, or how the citizens are experiencing travel on the streets, for lack of a better way to define it. And can you tell me how that plays into this whole thing?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and Alderman Jansen, we call that rideability. And so that's kind of a misconception a lot of times with the public is we might say The pavements are in satisfactory to excellent condition, and they say, well, that's silly. The roads are horrible riding. But what we mean when we have a good pavement is the pavement's in good condition where it's not falling apart, but it actually might ride not very comfortable because it's been patched multiple times. So when you drive your car over it, you're going to bounce and whatnot. The only way to really fix that is doing things like mill and overlays, or you can do it by microsurfacing, where you're putting a new layer of pavement on top and you're trying to get rid of those bumps, but that costs more. So you're getting away from chip seals and you're doing those more expensive treatments. So, there's a cost to adding that rideability back in. So there's always a balance that we're trying to find. We try to do those more expensive treatments on the arterials where you're having more traffic.
Thank you.
Rob?
Lance, real quick, and consultants, you guys have a 300% increase in consultants this year. What's going on that we need to hire a bunch of consultants in?
So some of that is, let me break that down for you. So for 2025, we have $15,000 for Esri GIS support. A lot of that goes towards if we need something programmed. So our GIS staff is really good at making maps and is good at general GIS maintenance. But if there's something that needs to be programmed, they're not software engineers. So we have those dollars in there. If something code related breaks, we can reach out to them and they help us with that. So it's basically a service contract to help us out with that. City Work support is in there for $25,000. We're nearing the end of our life cycle on this version of the CityWorks software that we're on. We have to start prepping this year for a pretty big software upgrade in 2026. So we have some dollars in there for a consultant to help us start preparing what reports we're going to have to convert over, what software is going to have to be converted, some of the partner software that we have. This is a pretty big endeavor, so we're going to need some help just manpower-wise getting us to prepare for that, so there's some dollars in there for that. Every 2 years, we do NDDOT bridge inspections. We have $20,000 in there for our cost share, so there's $20,000 for that. And then there's $60,000 in the budget for our every 5 years we fly the city for new aerial photography and LiDAR. The vendor that we use lets us spread that cost over a 3-year period, so that's year 1 of 3. Now, next year's budget, it'll be less than that because some of those costs will drop off. So that contracts line item that we have in engineering kind of ebbs and flows over the year, just depending on what some of those expenses happen to be.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I continue?
Continue.
Real quick, Harold, and that was very helpful, Lance. I mean, when you just see it on there as consultants and you have no idea what it is, it's concerning, I'll be honest, because last year we budgeted $1 million for consultants. This year we budgeted $1.5 million for consultants. And it seems to me that every time that we have consultants come in, it costs us more money because they tell us we need to spend to do this. So I like being able to hear what we're actually using it for. Is that something we can get from each department as to what they're planning for consulting this year?
We can get you a breakdown of the consulting funds across all departments and in more granular detail, if that's what you would like, yes.
Thank you. Thanks.
Do you have something, Harold?
Yeah,
Follow
Mr.
up on?
Mayor, if I can, while I have the mic, I wanted to circle back to one of the previous conversations that Alderman Blesson brought up with regards to use of reserves. And I just wanted to point out here that I've directed the assistant city manager and Lance as our city engineer to look at. We have a recommendation to try and get up to $16 million a year for proper maintenance of our streets, but that includes kind of catching up on some of the past maintenance issues. And so one of the directives I gave them was if council was willing to provide, let's say, $10 million out of reserves to help catch some of that up, can we get that $16 million a year estimate down to say $13 million? So we can invest some cash and reserves now to increase the quality of our streets, but then also decrease the annual cost of maintaining those on a regular basis. And so I just wanted to point out that that is one item that we're exploring that hopefully here in the future we'll be able to come back to council with a recommendation on if that's possible and if that'll make a difference.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Mike.
Just one point on that, Harold. I'd actually really like hearing that. One of a good friend of mine who is a legislator, one of the things that he said that it just resonated with me was whenever he sees road funding and bridge and that type of funding come through the legislative process, he's a yes, because it's something only the government can do. If there's one role that we have to have, it's that one. People aren't building their own streets. And so we have to fund that correctly. Now, that's not, obviously that's never a blank check. We all know that. But the point of it is that those are the core fundamental services as a city that we have to provide. And we have great partners, whether it's with the federal government, with DOT funds, whatever that is coming through to make sure that that happens. So I'm glad to hear that. I think that's a great way to look at it.
Anything further for Lance? Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
Moving on to shop. Is there anything for the shop budget? Seeing none. Street. Any questions for the street? Property maintenance. How about airport? Any questions for the airport? Jen, if you want to step forward.
Mayor, am I
Go
on
ahead,
mute?
Mike.
Okay,
It's-
all right, sounds
floor is
good.
yours.
So the one thing, a couple things that I did want to ask within airport, and this is maybe one specific to what Rob was just asking. Jennifer, what are the consultants that you're looking for during 25?
Interesting enough, the consultant line item is slightly different for the airport. We have an air service development consultant that we have on contract who provides us help with our lease agreements with our airlines, car rentals, and other businesses. But a bulk of that is actually our contract with Laz Parking. So Laz Parking is our management company that handles all of our parking, the revenue side of it, collecting the revenue for us and stuff. So as we make more in parking, that fee is a percentage of the contract depending on how much revenue we collect. So their fee back to us is put under that line item of consulting.
And so one of the other things then, when I looked at the way that your wages are breaking down, the different positions that are there, my understanding, and that's where I'm asking the question, can you help us understand a little bit? You've got some reclassifications of roles, some things that are a little different, I think, than we're seeing in other spots. So can you talk about that a little bit, what the roles look like and how that's changing?
Yeah, the additional reclassification, it's not an additional employee, it would be a promotion of an employee or two employees at that, for that matter. We have looked at the way we're organized currently, and we're looking to promote one of our facility techs and one of our operation techs to a tech 3 position or a lead position type of thing, so that during non-normal business hours, we have a point of leadership, and we also have the ability to maybe highlight that individual and train them slightly more, and so that they will be like the trainer of the operations department or the trainer of the facilities department, in order to maintain and give opportunities for career development within our department.
Okay. And then just beyond that, then the other piece of it was, was it your sense that you were facing some of the main market issues that we were seeing across the city in terms of pay and just equitable and making sure that it's matching the industry and things like that?
Yeah, that's more of a question for Lisa, but they did their pay study, and we found that there were a number of positions that were below the grade of our competitor airports around the country, and in particularly in this particular region, in the Midwest region.
Okay. And so with those types of positions, because that kind of leads into what those market studies are really doing and how they're structured, and Lisa, if there's something to add, but that one in particular, is most of your hiring and your recruiting, would it be, say, a Devil's Lake size airport? You're trying to grab somebody that's that, or is it, hey, I'm working in a small business in the community, and I'm a good fit, I'm a smart person, someone that you can hire, and I'm interested in those comparisons and how those market surveys work.
It really depends on the position. Someone going to work for like our facilities department, I could hire off the street an individual who has experience working at the hospital in their facilities department, or some other corporate building sort of facilities functions, potentially custodial experience, that kind of stuff. When it comes to our operations team, an individual that has experience in CDL is very helpful, but the background, it takes longer to hire someone and train them in our operations department, because there's a lot of complexity to that one, where they have to actually speak on the radio, talk to the tower, make sure they're not driving on a runway when an aircraft has been inbound to land, things like that. So that one takes a lot more time and training, and it's a little bit more difficult to find that specialty. The individuals in the upper level admin side of things, it definitely takes a little bit more skill and capability, and prior experience working at an airport is much more beneficial. But there have been instances where, like my current business and development manager, she started out with no experience in airports and worked her way up within our organization to that position, and so she's learning on the job.
I can continue. So then, just switching gears a little bit. First of all, I noticed that in our city fee structures, a bunch of your fees at the airport were being looked at. So,
Yep.
Is that kind of the opposite situation, where we're able to do that because competitively we are, because there's options? Or does that put us at any, I guess, peril with our airline partners and anybody else that's paying those fees?
So our airline leases are negotiated, and we're in the process of renegotiating them. And you'll notice in our line item budgets that there's certain line items that are airline or air service, or I can't remember how exactly those line items are listed, but those expenses are directly turned back to the airline as a fee, as in their landing fees are calculated based off the expenses that we charge, or that we anticipate, or that we've experienced. So if over the course of the year we anticipate that we're going to have so many million pounds of landings, we will calculate the landing fee based off of that we anticipate this many millions of landings, or million pounds of landings. Therefore, the cost of maintaining the runway is going to cost X amount of dollars, and we try to counterbalance and get close to zero as possible on that particular fee structure. The terminal rent, that's another one where it's based off of the number of passengers each airline brings in, and each airline pays their percentage. So an airline like Allegiant may have 20% of the market share in our airport, so they'll pay 20% of the cost of maintaining the terminal building. Let's see, the other fees that are increasing, recently the State Aeronautics Commission presented a budget, or a fee study that they did statewide, and our hangars, or T hangars in particular, were really low compared to the rest of the state. Even our general aviation airports, they pay a significantly greater amount, so the plan is to increase those. We also just recently redid a taxi lane project, which benefits those T hangars, so we anticipate part of the cost of that project will be offset by the new fees a little bit, not too much. I'm trying to remember what other fees we have.
And I think that's fine. I think, so the first couple you mentioned, I want to make sure I caught that right. So are they actually calculations that the FAA gives you for how to do those, or it's something that's just typically how
It's
it's been
based off their
done?
lease, the way the lease is written. It says that you,
Okay,
you
so it's adjusting
airline
to that.
will pay for the cost of the runways and
Okay.
taxiways.
Okay. And is those first few that you were talking about, the way that they're calculated, it's based on the
Yep.
lease? Okay.
Yep.
Rob?
Thank you. Just looking at this, first glance, when I look at the revenue detail, it seems we've lost about $6 million in federal funding. Can you talk about that a little bit?
That depends on the projects. I could increase that, but then my expenses will increase too. So right now, we're in the middle of an $8.2 million wetland and wildlife and mitigation and wetland drainage program. And so that project is $8.2 million. So it's significantly higher than the anticipated projects next year. And that's the difference between those two.
And then one other thing I saw in there, no interest income last year or no interest revenue. This year we got about $400,000. What are we getting interest on?
That is a question for finance because
Okay,
they're the
I can
ones
ask
that
Dave
input
later.
that number for me.
And then the other thing that I saw that kind of concerned me, how old is the airport? Is it 8 years old?
The airport is 8 years old,
8
yes.
years old? We have a lot of big bills for structure repair and maintenance, and now the HVAC maintenance. Is any of that recoverable through federal funds, or is this all?
No, that is all on us to repair. And some of those, the HVAC system that's listed in there is actually for our general aviation building, which is more than 50 years old.
Okay,
The original terminal.
okay. Thank you.
Any other questions of Jen? We want to get Dave to come up. Do you have the answer on the interest revenue portion? Thank you, Jen.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Fuller, that again is similar to what we discussed earlier. In prior years, the interest revenues were all recorded into the general fund and then allocated out to the separate funds. And the change this year is it's allocated directly into the fund, so it's showing up in the budget.
Okay.
And that would be earnings on cash reserves.
Thank you.
Harold?
If I may kind of circle back to one of Alderman Fuller's questions with regards to the HVAC, just to make the council aware. So we have a contract with Customs and Border Patrol to provide that facility. That contract is very much geared towards the CBP, where we bear a lot of the costs. I think we get about $14,000 a year in revenue on that. But we're responsible for providing all the furniture, the janitorial cleaning. If the HVAC system goes down, the security system, all of that is on the city's costs to fix. And that will be a conversation that I would encourage staff to have with council in the near future of whether being able to claim that our airport is an international airport because we have Customs and Border Patrol out there is worth that cost. It may be. I'm not saying that we should get rid of it, but I think that's a valuable conversation for us to have and explore and make sure that we're looking at that and that investment still has value.
All right, moving on. Any questions of the cemetery budget?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Mike.
do we have someone that can answer a couple questions just operationally? This one was just of interest to me. As we went through the process, there's a line item in the budget in the property tax line, and so I understand the columbarium. We're at that point, and I think the people that I've talked to, the trends are that way. So I think that makes perfect sense. Long term, that's probably where it needs to go. The operational things that I was wondering about is how do we structure things today? The primary service we're providing out there, aside from taking care of the grounds, is the actual digging, right? Digging and filling. And so how do we handle that today? Is it Monday through Friday? What are the options available for a family or for a funeral home? Do you know that?
Mayor Ross, Alderman Blessum, what I'd actually like to do is I'd have my superintendent from the cemetery come out. But he can go ahead and talk a little better to the day-to-day operations and give you a little better picture.
Perfect.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blissum. The staff is there. Their scheduled times are Monday through Friday during the day. We provide services at, obviously, the graves are dug ahead of time. So we can provide the services at any time. The fee schedule is a little different depending on if it's after our hours or on Saturdays or Sundays and holidays. There's increase in fees, but the services are provided at any time.
Okay. All right. So that's the great part that I was going for, was the actual client of the funeral home has that option. If that's something they need, whether it's a Saturday or Sunday,
Yeah.
they can pay for it and get the service. They're looking for.
Alderman Blessman, of course. It's like I said, the fee schedules are different, and we work with the local funeral homes and actually a number of them from around the state to schedule burials. Sometimes, a month in advance if it's a cremation burial, or if it's during the winter, something like that. But the services are there depending, anytime that people want. I mean, we do have some limitations because once it gets dark, the cemetery isn't lit, so then it becomes a problem. But that in the 17 years I've been there, I think we've worked somewhat in the dark like twice. So that's not an issue. But the services are there for the families at any time during the week. So
Perfect. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. Okay, that wraps up the budget portion of it. Are there any final questions? We'll save comments and discussion for the action item, but are there any final questions? Yes.
So I do have a couple of things that I guess we didn't get all the way down to. So it looks like there's an addition of an emergency fund. Is that something that's new or coming back, or can you speak to that, Harold? Page 129, if it's.
Can you give me a little more detail what you're talking about as far
Yep.
as an emergency
Yep.
fund?
Yep, if you can look at page 129 is what I'm looking at.
I'll have to defer to finance on that emergency fund account.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, there's a limit for the emergency fund or guidance from the state to how much you can have in your emergency fund. We haven't had to tap into that for a number of years, and with earnings into that fund from interest, now we're forecasting that we would be over the limit, so we're moving those funds out.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good on that one. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I just want to make sure if you've got another finance question, we got Dave
No,
up here. Okay.
I don't think this one would be finance.
Okay.
My other one then would be on the library, and I don't know if we got some feedback on that. The library associate position that we had, that we talked about a little bit earlier today. In the numbers that show up, it looks like a full ad, but I believe it's a part-time to full-time. Is that right?
Yeah, we can let Zaina respond on that, but
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, that is correct. It was a input error on my part. It is not a full ad. It is promoting and turning one of our part-time library assistants into a full-time library associate one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the rest of mine will be on the regular discussion.
Okay.
I got one.
Rob.
Just real quick, and I don't know, under public transportation, page 151, so it looks like we're budgeting $1 million to buy a new hybrid diesel electric bus. Now, I guess my question on this, last year we made $68,000 on our public transit system. This year we're projecting we're gonna make $75,000. I'm just wondering, breaking down the numbers, and I could be wrong, but I looked at them. It appears on our 8 routes, we have approximately 3 riders per bus per hour in a given day, if you divide the numbers out by what it costs to ride the bus versus what we made last year. Is this really a real I mean, we want to spend $1 million on a hybrid electric bus when we made $75,000 last year in revenue off our public transit? You know, and other questions on top of it I'm going to have. What are the costs of the replacement batteries for this bus? Have we looked at that? You know, what are the costs versus a standard, buying just a brand new diesel bus that would operate, you know, like the other buses up here? Can our mechanic that we currently have to work on it work on the electric bus as well as the other buses? Or are we going to have to hire somebody new? Just general questions in the public transit thing, but that seems a little concerning to me.
I would say those are all great general questions, and we'll let Brian Horinka come up and answer that. I guess I'll defer to him and I'll add if needed.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Fuller, those are all really good questions. When we're looking forward to things like that, one thing you have to look at, the income we're making is very inconsequential. A lot of transit systems are a no-fare system. About 60+% of our income comes from federal and state sources. We don't put a lot of money into transit from the local sources. When it comes to capital purchases, that's 85% reimbursed by federal services. The reason we're looking at the hybrid, and this is not a full electric bus, so it's not the type of bus where you would have a battery replacement after a number of years. This is a diesel electric hybrid. Right now, the way transit is going nationwide and the way the federal government is pushing, they're pushing toward low, no emissions services for transit. I am not prepared to go into a full electric bus right now. I don't think that's been explored enough here in our environment to go that route. But I do think that we maybe could start looking that direction by dipping our toes into the water with a hybrid type bus. The money for those buses are much easier to acquire. The way the federal government has set up the grants, it's almost a gimme to get 85% to go buy a hybrid bus. Much more competitive to buy a straight diesel bus right now because they're trying to phase those out. A straight diesel bus is probably about $650,000 to $700,000. Hybrid isn't at $900,000 to $1 million. Full electric is about 1.4. Our funding sources are changing as we move forward as an MPO and as a urban community, so we're going to see some shift in that as well. And as far as your questions about our ridership, we provided 80,000 rides last year, and I know to some of the general public it appears that we're not being used. But one thing you have to realize is the people that are using our buses are using it because they need it. We give them that freedom to stay at home. We give them the freedom to be able to go out and do things and live their lives without counting on other people. We're not in New York City. We're not LA. We're not going to bring in that kind of income. But what we do is extremely important to the community and to those that need it. That's why there's all those federal programs to help with that. And I think it would be a disservice to the community if we started to try to cut that.
And I agree. I'm not saying we cut it at all. I think it's an essential service. My questions were more with the limited amount of revenue that we do bring in, and I realize most of it is federally funded. Would we be better off maybe saying, hey, we're not going to charge anybody anything? Would we be able to get more funds from the Fed that way? And a second part of that question, with the reimbursement on the hybrid electric bus, you said it's about 85%. What are the hooks? Because the government always gives you a hook when you buy something through them.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Fuller, there really isn't a lot of hooks in that case except for the fact that the government has an interest in that bus for the life of that bus, which in this case would be 15 years. So if something were to happen and the council would say, we're going to shut down transit, we would have to put money back to the federal government in a certain percentage to reimburse them for what they put into those buses that they're buying for us. That's really the only hook when it comes to the money we get for our capital. What was the other part of your question, sir? I'm sorry.
I'm just wondering if we made it a free ride system like you talked about, would we be able to get more federal funding as opposed to just charging a minimal amount?
That's something I want to look at moving into the future, especially with the way our grant funding has changed now. I would like to explore that over the course of the next couple of years because the amount of money we collect in fares has no bearing on our money that's coming in from the government, but in some cases ridership does, especially our senior and our senior and disabled ridership. Those numbers help drive more state income, the more of those rides we get. So moving forward, as we learn this new urban system and these different criteria that they're setting forth on how they're going to fund us, that will make us more able to sit down and decide whether that's something we want to look at moving into. But it is something I have had some discussions with staff about, and we're definitely looking at in the future.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions of Brian? Thanks, Brian. If there are no further questions, we will move on to our action items. Item 4.1, adopt the 2025 preliminary budget and pay plan. What are the wishes of the council?
I would move approval on that, Mr. Mayor.
We have a motion by Lisa. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mark. Discussion. Mike.
I'll start off, and actually, I've got a bunch of things that I want to talk about, but I think I'll start right now. I want to bring the amendment to go to the hybrid compensation adjustment plan. I'm not positive I'm sold quite yet, but I think we need to have that discussion. It's part of the proposals that the city manager has put forward along working with HR. And I think that we need to consider that. And so I'll make an amendment to the main motion to adjust to the hybrid plan that the city manager has proposed.
Lisa, do you have an objection to that?
I guess I would like a clarification if this is the right time to do this, or if this is better on first reading.
And procedurally, since there's a motion and a main motion on the floor, this, I think, would be best presented as a motion to amend that would need a second. And then we would then discuss that specific motion. If that's approved, then the main motion would stand as amended. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess that was my intent. I think Lisa's maybe saying, has it been practice, or is that type of thing done at first reading? I guess is that the question really? Because I think my amendment would be in order.
Yes.
Right, for the main
I
motion.
think it would be in order. Yes.
So we'll move on with looking for a second for the amendment.
I'll second.
We have an amendment, a motion to amend, and a second. Discussion on the amendment. Do you have any further?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
if I continue then. So the reason that I think it's important that, not necessarily that we move forward with the amendment, but that we have the discussion, is that this is what we're talking about in terms of the first piece of paper that every resident of our city gets. So when they get that first piece of paper, this is going to show them the starting point for what that property tax number is going to look like. And one of the priorities I've had throughout was that we show them an adjustment downward if at all possible. And I think we're on the right path to get there. The other thing through the discussions that we've had, and when we look at the market and step increases that we are currently doing, we are moving very quickly, as Alderman Fuller put it before, especially over the last 3 to 4 years, very, very quickly. We are chasing a rabbit down a hole right now with that method that we will never catch. And so we're going to be mired in 6 to 12% increases as far as the eye can see, because the market is moving as fast as any adjustment we could ever make. That's my perspective on it. That's what I've gleaned from the process as we've gone so far. Now, whether that should happen now or at first reading, I'm open to that. One way or the other, I want to have this discussion. If that means passing it as presented tonight, I would be okay with that, but I do think we need this discussion.
Harold?
If I may, Mr. Mayor and Alderman Fuller, while I'm in agreement with council considering the hybrid version, I think at this step in the process, in essence, if your amendment was to pass tonight, and maybe this is what you want to have happen, we would have to lower the mill levy. 700,000, that's probably 2 3/4 of a mill levy, probably 2.75 or so, which would take that mill levy down from 115 down to the 112.25 range. But at that point, if the council chooses that they're not going to move forward with the hybrid version and you want to do the full 2.3 million, you're not going to be able to go back and raise that levy to do that. You're going to have to cut that 700,000 from somewhere else in the budget. I don't know if the council is willing to make that decision tonight to lock that in. You still have the ability, if you approve the preliminary budget as recommended by me at the 115 mill levy, you can decrease that mill levy or make these decisions and decrease that in the future before you finalize the budget. So that's not off the table, but I think you're restricting your options by approving that amendment tonight. And I don't know that I would advise doing that tonight.
That was my concern. Mark?
Yeah, I would concur with the city manager on that point. I think that there may be some other nuances or some other things. And while I tend to agree with Alderman Blessam that this is certainly something that we want to consider and maybe go ahead with, because it is such a large single piece, I think doing that tonight is maybe premature.
Lisa?
And I guess I would just echo those concerns as well. This was our opportunity tonight to ask questions. We have people listening, but we haven't had public input. We haven't heard from residents. We haven't heard from employees. I want to give us that opportunity. And so, while I think that this is something that will be discussed a lot more and probably very likely considered, I think that it's something that should happen a little bit further down the road.
Okay, we have an amendment. We have a second, an amendment and a second. Seeing no further discussion, please call the roll on the amendment.
Blessam?
No.
Fuller?
No.
Janser?
No.
Olson? Pittner?
No.
Ross?
No.
Samuelson?
No.
The amendment failed.
Okay, moving on to the motion as it stands, the recommended action. We do have a motion and a second for approval. Seeing any further discussion?
Just one quick
Mike.
thing, Mr. Mayor. So Harold, again, I wanted to commend you and your team. You've done a nice job of delivering on what you said that you would, and I think that's an important step for where we're headed. One of the things I did want to talk about real quick, though, just kind of in this sort of public forum, I like the idea that you've kind of brought forward that, hey, everything's on the table. The team was asked to come through and justify really everything top to bottom. And I think that's important for any organization whenever that occurs. It sort of segues into Mr. Fuller's comments about consultants. We're hiring the type of consultant, the opposite of what I was when I was a consultant, which was, man, we were there to slash and cut every job we could find. That's what the upper management was always asking for. Our consultants tend to go the opposite direction. And that sort of segues into I guess my comment here is that while it's great that we've gone through that process and we've done a nice job of justifying everything, and we've got more work to do to get there, it's interesting to me that process, top to bottom, across 460-odd employees, resulted in the addition of a couple FTEs. So across all of those departments, all of those dollar amounts, all of those pieces, our staff remained the same. And I don't want anybody to get me wrong. My point is not that you should have identified that this person in this job is going to go away. My hope in that process over the long term, when you go about things that way, is that those things are identified. And whether it's through attrition or through reorganizations or through things that occur in the life cycle of the city organization, that we do identify those. One that you did do was the economic development director. That was one that was identified and set to the side. And so, my hope as we do those top to bottom reviews is that we find those long term. Now, I realize that won't show up in one round. So we've got more work to do there, I think. But that's just a comment that I wanted to add. I think the approach is all right, and I think the long term fruits of that are where I hope we get to.
Any other comments? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Samuelson?
Yes.
Blessam?
Yes.
Fuller?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Motion passes. Moving on to action item number 5, and that is adjournment. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We are adjourned. Good meeting.